how to fill 20 minutes, particularly how to fill 20 minutes after a succession of eloquent, informed clinicians and amazing speakers, which is often the role that those of us in the third sector, voluntary sector, charities, call us what you will, have to face. So I'll do my best. So I will just kick off with, is anybody here from Wales, just to make me a little safer? Oh, no, sorry, not fantastic. Almost, chill. Yeah, honorary, just the one. So nobody speaks Welsh? No. Okay. Oh, is that an almost, or you just no? Okay. So I just wanted to literally, because I always do this, to introduce my own talks with a good morning and a good afternoon. So I will just say Prynawn da, which is good afternoon, Prynawn da, and I chi gyd. Diolch am croeso heddiw. Now, amazingly, that doesn't mean I'm a little bit upset because I still haven't seen any champagne. It means thank you very much for the kind invitation today. I really mean that, and particularly because, as is now evident, I am the only person in the room from Wales. I know there are a few from Northern Ireland and Scotland, and I think this leads neatly into where myself and Julia have been talking over recent months and probably over about the course of a year now, Julia. I found out about John's campaign in the same place that most people who didn't read it in The Observer found out, which is on Twitter, of course. Where else do I find out about anything in the world these days, unfortunately? However, the social media work has been quite incredible, and just that alone, along with all the other things that we need to pay tribute to Nikki and Julia for doing, but having the foresight to make sure that there is a really, really consistent presence on social media is enormous, because although we joke about it, as you all know, or most of you will know, that it is, for many of your friends and colleagues, the only way many people find out about news at all, in any way, these days. And certainly the colleagues of mine who raised it with me found out about it through Facebook and Twitter sort of a year, 18 months ago. So I come at this from the point of view of Carers Trust, which is a relatively new charity supporting carers both directly and indirectly through a network of local carer-focused services across the whole of the UK. And a couple of years ago, we produced a report called A Road Less Rocky, which was an investigation into and conversation with carers and families of people living with dementia to understand where their experiences had been negative and why. And to echo what so much has been said this afternoon, the biggest factor by a country mile was a lack of information. A lack of information at diagnosis, before diagnosis, online, and in and around hospital, primary care and then hospital settings, and particularly enhanced in acute settings and on wards. And that was, by a very long way, the biggest issue for the families and carers. And that's really my stepping off point for contacting Julia, that and the regular tweets that John's campaign put out. Because in Carers Trust in Wales, we get a lot of, like I said, both direct from carers calling and also information from our local services talking about these issues and raising them. And so I think the fact that I'm speaking under the overcoming the obstacles section is really about identifying maybe why we haven't made as much progress in Wales as we would have liked. Our initial conversation, myself and Julia, was along those lines when she was very straightforward about this and showed me the map that's on the website, which shows, as most of you will have seen, the lots of dots, and the dots have gathered and clustered over the last sort of year, 18 months, and that's fantastic. Well, there aren't an enormous number of dots in Wales, and I suppose just for me to highlight the general points and to reflect a little bit more of what has come out this morning, and particularly the amazing brave voices that we heard before lunch, they reflect much more of the experiences that we are told about through the charity in Wales. And what I just wanted to explore was to ask the question about why, and to send that question out into the audience and for our session later on, and for the future, because what's been said today is so tremendously powerful, and there is so much opportunity and force for good and force for change that we want to garner it. And those of us who are formally, informally, call us what you will, ambassadors for John's campaign and want to continue to be ambassadors, need to know and need to find out what those real icky, difficult, defensive challenges are on the front line, so that we can be seen to work in partnership and actually work in partnership. So it's not great everywhere. It's not been particularly great pickup in Wales. And I guess what I want to do is identify why not. And what we've been trying to do is to identify why not. And I guess we have heard several summaries about it. But the thing that I wanted to bring into play, which may have absolutely nothing to do with it, but those of you are more eminent and more senior, particularly in clinicians who may have travelled in and out of Scotland and Wales, and particularly Wales from my point of view, I wanted to flag up this wonderful world of devolution that for those of you who've lived in England and continue to live in England over recent years would have heard about maybe on the TV or the news, and absolutely fine. You'd understand roughly what it's about, and you know, particularly in the last year or so, there's been an independence referendum in Scotland. Well, there hasn't been in Wales, and there isn't going to be. But in every other respect, our public services have been turned upside down in the last 15 years. We have a Welsh government governing a country with a population the size of Birmingham. We have multiple incredibly different systems for health and social care in Wales, and I am asking the question, both rhetorically and practically, across the UK, whether that has actually contributed in any way to the lack of pickup, and whether we think that those systems and the changes in those systems have actually contributed in any way. Anyone who looks at the difference between the English NHS and the Welsh NHS now, for example, will see an already incredibly increasing divergence, not only in terms of the amount of money that's being spent on it, but in terms of the structures and the systems. So this brings me to what it actually looks like now. So, you know, we joke in terms of public services in Wales that nothing happens unless the Welsh government says it can happen. And that's only partly true. You know, there's a budget of 15 billion. There's 7 local integrated health boards, and under which everything else happens. So there's no CCGs. There's not the sort of flexibility of autonomy. Everything is under this triangle with a wraparound of the of a local health board at the top. Not entirely dissimilar to colleagues in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, instinctively, we would say that there is not necessarily any necessary difference. Nurses are doing the same job. Clinicians are doing the same job, consultants are doing the same job, charities are doing the same job lobbying, carers and families are facing the same challenges with dementia, whether they happen to live on one side of the border or the other. But I'm particularly interested in why, of all of the UK, it does seem that it's only Wales where 1 or 2 very, very amazing nurses have picked John's campaign up. And it has been entirely a bottom-up, very, very limited piece of work, where in North Wales, I'll make a particular reference to a nurse who Julia and Nikki know well, called Delyth in Ysbyty Gwynedd in northwest Wales. In Glaslyn Ward, where very, very Welsh-speaking part of Wales, very rural part of Wales. And again, that leads me to ask questions about whether in England or Scotland there are any differences between rurality and urban centres. Again, there maybe shouldn't be. And I don't know, there may be people in the audience who can answer this later in terms of studies that have happened or studies that could happen as a result of this. But from what we see, it is the smaller health boards with the more rural populations where individual nurses are picking this up and pushing it and promoting it. But anywhere larger and anywhere more urban, we're seeing lots of conversations. There's a phrase I've got somewhere which we use a lot in Wales in terms of public services. there's lots of conversations, there's lots of interest, there's lots of analysis, but there's not a lot of action. And I don't for a second believe that there's anything particularly culturally different or anything particularly geographically different. But it begs the question about what particularly is happening and what may or may not be happening in the parts of England and Scotland that we haven't actually focused on already today. Because as somebody made the point just before lunch, after the Voices section, we've all said how humbling it is to hear the stories and the positivity from particularly the high-ups in the NHS in England this morning. And if we're not careful, I find particularly it would be difficult maybe to not get carried away with a tide of actually things are moving pretty uniformly in the right direction. And I'm concerned that where I'm from and when I travel around Wales, that's not the case. Now, I've spent about 15 years working with carers and families, all from the charity point of view. I spent 7.5 years working very closely with people with Parkinson's, both in hospital and outside in the community settings. As I'm sure many of you will know from your experiences with loved ones with dementia, the experience in a hospital setting, particularly where medication is of plays such a key role, the carers and families are the guide. They are, as has been Professor just referred to, not just another pair of eyes and ears, but an actual informed partner in the process. Now, these are the messages that we get continually into my little office in Cardiff, and always followed up by the question, why can't they see that? Why can't they see this? The young lady this morning who talked about her grampy, as we called in Welsh, her granddad from the South Wales hospital, who I think has gone now, or she would have bailed me out by being my one other person from Wales here. That sort of environment is very reflective, unfortunately, of the experiences that we hear about. And so I think what we really need to do is focus on building this as the social movement that it's been referred to many times this morning. The reason I'm asking so many questions in quite a scattergun way is because although I realise, as has been said, that this is a social movement, it will only really genuinely develop bottom up. But actually, I think those of us who are close to it, those of us who have worked, I supported my wife's grandmother for quite a period of time in and out of hospital and living in sheltered accommodation with dementia, and seeing many of the things that you have articulated beautifully and bravely this morning. It is only by those nurses getting it and having the time to get it and have those conversations and for those relationships to be human that we will move this on. But my whole question about our barriers in a country which is really quite small is that we have every right to be impatient. This should already be happening. This should already be happening in the majority, if not all, of our hospital settings. And it's been enlightening to listen to precisely the sorts of barriers that nurses and consultants face today, because although I speak to nurses and consultants relatively regularly, not nearly as much as families and carers, and I have to be really careful that although we have a representative role with family carers in Wales, that actually we do this in partnership. This is not about pushing back and making people feel even more defensive for not having done the work that we feel they should have done by now. Of course, it should be happening, but there are lots and lots of reasons why it hasn't, and it's not a nurse's fault, or it's not a chief exec's fault on their own. It's a collective cultural issue which we all need to address. But I think in thinking about how I have been asking the question of hospitals in Wales, the answers I've come back with, and I'm pleased in a way that they've been reflected back to me today, and they'll go out as more questions, hopefully, to help me in future, have been around confidentiality. I keep hearing confidentiality is the problem. It can't be done because confidentiality. It's not legal, is another one I've had a few times in the last year or two. Can't be done. It's not, whether that relates directly to confidentiality or not, but I had that specifically sent to me last year. Can't be done. It's not a legal approach. The family will just be expected to care. We're not expecting them to care, and of course that's a very genuine approach and something that we're all concerned about. But those comments have been made to me from a rather defensive perspective, that actually I am expecting the carers and families to take over in that setting, when of course we're just asking those questions. So I think one of the things that I've appreciated enormously today was listening to Gillian earlier as a senior nurse, but working in a real-time environment in a hospital in Scotland, and I'll want to follow that up, because we keep receiving responses from both hospital structures in Wales and political structures in Wales that say it's great, it's interesting. So there's lots of analysis, there's lots of discussion, but there's not a lot of action. And hopefully with your support and with this as an even greater kind of fulcrum and network for going forward, you can build and help me and others right across the charity sector and carers and families build and identify the brilliant work that is already going on out there. Because I know and we know that there is some. It's just that we really want to winkle that out, and hopefully together we can do that in the years ahead. Thanks so much for your time today. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd.